Like many other Canadian air elements, the history of 418 Squadron can be traced back to the Second World War. Formed and dubbed in England in 1941, 418's role was unique for an Allied squadron, being tasked to intrude deep into enemy territory, carrying out bombing runs and ambushing German aircraft. This new role was a closely guarded secret, and many of the squadron's aircrew could only guess at their role in the war. The shroud of secrecy was finally lifted in 1942, when the squadron took off with its Boston bombers towards its first target of oil refineries located in Belgium. Commanding officer of the day was Wing Commander Saunders, who took the squadron from participating in small attacks to assisting with the raid on Dieppe. During the raid, the unit was to provide support to Canadian ground troops. Despite their best efforts, gunners on board the Bostons were unable to keep the enemy at bay, resulting in one of 418's Bostons being shot down. While the Boston bomber was the first aircraft flown by the squadron, the reputation earned by the unit was a result of operations with the Mosquito. From the outset, the Allied Air Command had some special plans for this new squadron, events which eventually put 418 and its personnel into the history books. The arrival of the Mosquito was the aircraft which forced not only the Germans, but other Allied units to take notice of the exploits of 418. The Mosquito was introduced to the squadron in 1943 and quickly proved itself as one of the most versatile aircraft to date. One of the men who flew this new wooden wonder was former Squadron Wing Commander Russ Bannock.
The Mosquito was really the fastest piston-powered aircraft of World War II until the Hawker Tempest came along at the end of the war, and it was a little bit faster. But at sea level, the Mosquito could do about 385 miles an hour, and at altitude at 20,000 feet it could do over 400 miles an hour. And it could actually outrun the German piston-powered fighters of the day, that is the Messerschmitt 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. And it had outstanding armament. The Mosquitoes we flew in 418 Squadron were powered with 4 20-millimeter cannons and 4 303 machine guns, which was very heavy firepower and was a big asset.
Like many pilots commissioned into the Second World War, Bannock was lured to the sky prior to the outbreak of hostilities, learning to fly in Edmonton and eventually taking a job as a bush pilot.
I worked in Yellowknife that summer and fall and the winter of 1938-39. I completed my flying and got a commercial pilot's license at the Edmonton Flying Club, and flew for Yukon Southern Air Transport as a co-pilot during the summer of 1939, and then was called into the Air Force the day the war started. Every pilot with a commercial license in Canada was invited to join the RCAF as a pilot officer, and instead of going to university, which I was planning to do, I joined the Air Force and stayed in the Air Force until the war was over. In fact, I stayed in the Air Force for a year afterward, and then joined the de Havilland Aircraft Company, where I spent most of my commercial aviation career.
Of pilots, including Bannock, started to rack up impressive scores in the air, it was perhaps the defense of Britain where 418 etched out its piece of aviation history. The new technology faced by Bannock and his fellow pilots was unleashed by German scientists and came in the form of a flying bomb. Totally unpredictable, these new demons of the sky would simply run out of fuel and drop on unsuspecting cities in England with deadly results.
We started out trying to attack the V-1s, which were fired across the English Channel. They were launched from launching pads on the French coast. They flew at about 300 feet above the water and at speeds up to 400 miles an hour, and we just tried beam attacks, but we found that we really couldn't catch them except if we happened to be right over top of them. So after a couple of days of fruitless attacks, we decided we'd patrol at 10,000 feet over the center of the channel, and we patrolled up and down. As soon as we saw V1 being fired, there was a big flame as it was launched, and the V1 trailed a flame about 20 feet long, so it was easy to follow. And we flew an interception course over the center of the channel, so we would be actually flying towards London, waiting for it to catch up below us, 10,000 feet below us. And when it was directly underneath, we would dive down in the Mosquito, achieving speeds of about 430 miles an hour. And this gave us about 30 seconds as we rounded out to shoot it down. We quickly found that it was often fatal to shoot at it from right behind because the fuel tanks, that is the liquid oxygen, it was hydrogen peroxide, I think, and kerosene blew up, and if the warhead blew up, there was so much debris that the aircraft flew into it. And the Mosquito, of course, had liquid-cooled engines, and if pieces hit the radiator, you soon lost your engines. So we quickly found that we should attack it from the side at about a 25 or 30 degree angle, which meant deflection shooting, and then breaking off sharply as soon as the aircraft the V1 blew up. And that was the technique that was most successful.
There was little doubt dueling with a flying bomb was risky work, but then that typified the operations taken on by the squadron. Perhaps one of the most unusual assignments involved 3 crews from the squadron who were temporarily attached to 617 Squadron to provide support in the famed dam-busting raids. While the effort was gallant, the bombers suffered heavy losses during the raid. Of the 8 which took part in the operation, only 3 returned. Public recognition soon followed the squadron and its exploits, but there were some elements of the unit's work which never saw the light of day until the end of the war. Support to the French underground was undertaken by squadron leader Hal Lisson. Already proficient in night flying, 418 pilots were well suited to infiltrate occupied France to drop much-needed supplies to the freedom fighters. Towards the latter part of the war, a common thread could be found within the ranks of 418, in that 95% of the airmen were Canadian. In addition, a large number of those were from the Edmonton or Northern Alberta area, prompting Edmonton City Council to adopt the squadron.
It was a tremendous morale booster to the squadron to be known as the City of Edmonton Squadron, and the people of City seemed to adopt it, and we've got all kinds of parcels from the people, the City of Edmonton, food parcels of all types, cigarettes, and even in some cases they sent us bottles of scotch cashed in loaves of bread. But we were very proud of the fact that we were a City of Edmonton Squadron, and of course for me, having grown up in Edmonton, and Ross Gray was another Edmontonian while I was there, Johnny Kane, and so it was quite nice for us to operate in a squadron that was adopted by our home city.
With the end of hostilities, the squadron's record was among the finest turned in by any Allied unit. 178 enemy aircraft had been shot down, 83 V-1 rockets destroyed, and approximately 200 motor vehicles were claimed by 418 crews. Many of those pilots and ground crews are listed here on this tablecloth, which was signed in Europe at the end of the war. While many squadrons were disbanded, this was not the case with 418. It found a new home at Edmonton's Municipal Airport. Given new aircraft designed to protect Canada from a Soviet threat, 418 carried much of the responsibility for the country's defense and was conducting so-called sovereignty flights into the Arctic long before it became a political issue. In 1946-47, equipped with B-25 Mitchell bombers and single-engine Harvards, 418 was again handed the role of intruding into enemy territory. But this time, the territory could be Canadian soil. In order to prepare for a possible invasion, a number of exercises were carried out. Monty Stout, a former navigator with the squadron, participated in just a few of them.
The first exercise we ran as a joint exercise was Exercise Eagle in the Grand Prairie area, which was the Canadian Army, Canadian Permanent Air Force, and the reserves. And then following that, there was Sweetbriar, which was a joint U.S.-Canadian venture up in Alaska. And that one was quite an extensive one. The fellows had to live in bush conditions. And then Shimo was the third exercise.
Most of the air crews were made up of veterans of the Second World War, and a good number of those flew the Mosquito. But making the adjustment to the B-25 Mitchell didn't pose any serious problems.
Well, I think the B-25 is a relatively easy aircraft to fly. I haven't heard anybody having difficulties with it, and certainly it had some of the amenities more like a civilian plane in that regard. The de-icing equipment and the automatic pilot, things like that. That it was. I didn't know of anybody that really had difficulties with it.
No sooner had the squadron made the adjustment to its role of protecting Canada's north, a political decision was reached by the government of the day, which saw a restructure of the air auxiliary forces throughout Canada. When the dust had settled, Canada's commitment to the auxiliary units had changed dramatically. No longer part of the country's frontline defense, 418 had been moved out of the tactical world and had been handed a new task of aid to the civil power. It was a change of direction which was met with mixed emotion. A number of pilots had started training with the T-33 jet. However, it was the C-45 Expediter and eventually the Single Otter which became the aircraft of the day. Major Bruce Edwards, a veteran of 30 years with 418, was part of those changing times.
In the early 60s, when the Cold War sort of heated up, all of Canada's reserve got involved in civil defense roles, and the Air Reserve was no different. We were assigned air reconnaissance roles, light transport and communications roles in that regard. And we also did a role which was known as radiation monitoring. Essentially, we turned the Expediter into a flying Geiger counter, which was then used to fly search patterns over an area which supposedly would have been bombed and detect radiation hotspots that resulted from fallout and that sort of thing.
From the Expediter, the squadron moved to the single-engine Otter, an aircraft which proved to be versatile in a number of areas.
We did aid to the civil authorities in a number of instances. We evacuated flood victims from an area in central to northern Alberta. And on one occasion I can remember us assisting a Mountie taking a body out of an aircraft crash site somewhere in northern Alberta, that sort of thing.
Providing support to the Army became a regular task for the squadron. Whether it was troop transport, aerial photography, or medical evacuations, 418 proved to be a reliable ally to ground forces. The squadron also continued with its presence in the north, carrying out environmental checks on oil exploration sites and visiting remote native communities. Throughout its early history, the squadron had been proud to show off the cartoon drawings of Al Cap and his dog patch characters, which included Moonbeam McSwine, Lil Abner, Lonesome Polecat, and Mammy Yoakum. While in the 50s, squadron bombers were adorned with an added feature, the Grey Cup, a symbol Monty Stout and other squadron members were proud to show off.
Well, most of us, I think, were football fans. I know I was. I was at the first meeting that started the Edmonton Eskimos after the war. It was in the old Redwood Rec building opposite the Winston Churchill Square, where it is now. And if possible, we managed to schedule training missions that went to Toronto or wherever the Grey Cup was. And unfortunately, I never managed to get picked on one of those. I had season tickets, but I never was lucky enough to get on one of the 418 training flights.
From the mid-1970s, 418 has been operating the Twin Otter in a search and rescue role. Stretching from the North Pole and covering 2 million square miles, the squadron has one of the largest search areas in Canada. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Gillespie, commanding officer of 418, outlines the operations of the squadron.
418 Squadron is a standalone squadron under the Air Transport Group organization, and we are primarily involved with search and rescue operations with the military Twin Otter. We also do VIP transport, we do light transport, air cadet familiarization flying, and we do some aerial photography as well.
While classified as an Air Reserve squadron, 418 personnel, regardless of trade, must meet regular force requirements. This puts added pressure on the squadron's training section to ensure the high standards of the regular force are achieved by all new recruits.
We do basically our own training. We teach our own technicians, the trades training required on aircraft types. We also teach them the basic military training, general military training, the marching, saluting, military history, that sort of thing. We provide basic trades training up to the QL3 level. And as far as the air crew are concerned, yes, we do maintain regular force standards. We train and teach our people the role that we're involved with on the Twin Otter, and we fly by the same rules and regulations as the regular force.
The squadron maintains close ties to the city of Edmonton. An active recruiting drive is launched every year in order to attract people from the Edmonton and surrounding area to the reserves.
We offer them a very challenging and a very rewarding career. It requires a certain amount of effort on their part, and by and large the training is well received, and the people that are fully trained and reach the regular force standards of training are very satisfied with it and seem to enjoy this way of life. It's probably the best of both worlds in that these people can maintain a civilian occupation as well as getting involved with the military occupation.
There are many diverse reasons why a person joins the military, each as individual as the member. Some join after spending a full career in the regular force. Others look at the reserves as an opportunity to expand their education, like Private Bridget Lukasek.
Well, I'm a student at the University of Alberta, and I'm taking a science degree, and I find that a lot of things that I learned as an aero engine technician go together with my university program.
The City of Edmonton has provided a strong foundation of squadron members who are integrated in the community and also loan their valuable talents and skills to the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves. For most squadron members, there is a challenge in balancing their responsibilities in the reserves, maintain a career as well meet all family commitments. People like Dave Lowen, an officer with the Edmonton Fire Department and technician and now air crewman with 418. Nancy Krause, a teacher with an Edmonton area elementary school, also an aero engine technician. Dr. Charles Baker, Assistant Dean of Dentistry at the University of Alberta. He is also the squadron's Management Information Systems Officer. While from the pilot side of the house, Captain Ed McDonald, who also flies for Canadian Airlines. Involvement within the community goes deeper than just personnel. Over the past 12 years, the squadron has provided transportation for an annual Christmas flight to Native communities located in northern Alberta. Loaded with clothing and gifts, the squadron, through the efforts of Elaine Armstrong, a nurse working in Edmonton, has become a familiar sight to the children in the northern communities and perhaps has earned a reputation that a yellow Twin Otter from the south can bring as much happiness as a fellow with 8 tiny reindeer from the north. This is only one aspect of the type of operations carried out by 418. A great deal of time is spent on preparing flight crews on the possibility of conducting search and rescue missions. In order to sustain aircraft operations, the flight crews rely heavily on maintenance and administration personnel. These members ensure all records are kept up to date and handle the payroll. The supply section, critical in providing resource material so that all elements of the squadron's personnel can carry out their assigned tasks. Healthcare needs, including recruit and flight crew medicals, as well as preventive care, is carried out by 2 doctors and 2 nurses. Put it all together and you have a squadron strength which stands at over 100 personnel. These members offer their time to carry out their duties, which often goes towards the support of the regular force. Over the past 50 years, the squadron has experienced many changes and is now in the process of evolving once again.
Essentially, it's a broadening of scope and certainly an increase in challenge for our type of operations. We will be conducting strategic and tactical airlift to the regular force, the same as the regular force squadrons would do on the C-130 Hercules. It means that probably a greater commitment on our part as individuals, and certainly a greater challenge, and probably more interesting and a more widely varied type of operation.
For 50 years, 418 Squadron has met the challenge of the day. One can expect current and future members will continue to uphold the high standards set by those who have served in the past.